Hello, I'm Emanuele Di Angelantonio, and I'm Professor of Clinical Epidemiology and Donor Health at the University of Cambridge and at the NIHR Blood and Transplant Research Unit in Donor Health and Genomics. And it's really a pleasure to present to you today on this donor research weeks of talks about the safety and efficiency of the blood donation, especially focusing on what has been the experience from the UK blood donors population and the national NHS Blood and Transplant Service. And so what is the need to perform large-scale studies in donors and actually establish a bioresource? So the first things that we've been thinking over the last few years is really trying to provide compelling evidence for the blood service, both nationally but as well internationally, on major issues that are related to blood donation. And really, this is really one to convince blood donation service to change their policy or to modify their policy to the best available evidence, and as well to try to provide a more personalized service to the blood service, but as well to the donors. And at the same time, really to involve blood donors into bioresources that actually can help address many questions, not only those relevant to blood donors, but as well relevant to the general population. And why England is a good place to perform this? Well, England is a good place to perform a large-scale study about the tradition of performing large-scale study, but as well, the blood service has about 0.9 million individuals actually donate, about 1.7 million donation actually. And usually, typically, the donors usually attend 2 sessions or 2 donations per year, and they're really sort of cost effectiveness to set up large-scale trial in the blood donation service, given the large number of fixed and mobile center, more than 70, the large number of donation sessions, and actually many phlebotomists and donors care actually taking blood from the different donors. And of course, donation is a voluntary act, and so donors are really keen to engage in research, both to help the service, but as well to help the wider population. So what we have done over the last few years really is trying to set up a truly collaboration and collaborative spirit between the academia and NHS Blood and Transplant. And it's been really trying to take really the key skills from each of the organization, but as well to have areas overlap in which things are developed, designed, and then put in practice together. It's really to make the most of what can be a resource from this kind of setting. And this is just a summary of what I want to talk to you today. So we started in 2009 with really building a feasibility study to try how can we actually embed large-scale study within the blood service. And then in 2012, we performed the first interval trial, moved then to COMPARE in 2016, and then in 2019 actually started the last one that's still ongoing, this trial. And during this my presentation, I really want to focus on the 3 main studies, so interval, COMPARE, and STRIVE, and I will cover what has been the design, what has been the main results of each one over the next few minutes. So let's start with interval. So interval was set up originally to try to address a question. It's really about how often donors should donate their blood. And as you can see from this slide, there's many different intervals that are in different countries. This is an example from Europe, but as well the same in Australia or North America or Canada, in which interval between donation, both in male and female, are not standardized, and they vary quite widely across different countries. And there is a European directive actually that set up the minimum interval, and really but you can see from this slide, actually, there's no fixed rule as well in Europe, in which, for example, England has a 12 weeks interval for men and 16 for women, and actually, many other countries have varying time between donation. And what is really astonishing is that there's not been any randomized clinical trial that provide definite data or actually answer to address this, to inform this policy. And so what we've done in 2012, we designed and launched the interval study. The interval study was really a trial that was designed to define what are the optimum time between donation. And really, what are the optimum time between donation to try to, 1, minimize risk of iron deficiency, 2nd, to maintain the blood supply, and as well to maintain donors' well-being. And on top of that, one of the key aspects was, can we actually use this trial to help to try to tailor donation interval according to donor ability to donate blood and the risk of developing iron deficiency. So the trial was, as I say, was started in 2012. Really was a target to recruit 50,000 donors across 25 centers across England, 25,000 men, 25,000 women, and each of the men and women were then allocated randomly to 3 different groups. So men were allocated to the 12 weeks, so the standard interval, 10 and 8, so the shorter interval, and women were allocated to 16 weeks, the standard interval, and then 14 and 12, again, the shorter interval. And there was really sort of a pragmatic randomized trial that was really embedded within the NHS blood and transplant framework. And this was the main trial outcome that we fixed. So one is the primary one was so the number of blood donation, really the amount of blood that each donor was able to donate over the trial period. And then key secondary outcome actually donors' well-being. And then, that was collected through different information, including questionnaire. And then there was a set of other secondary outcome, like, the hemoglobin status, the iron status, using ferritin, cognitive function, physical activity, different cardiovascular trait, and as well cost effectiveness. And so this was the recruitment, how it was done. And in the interval study, as you can see, the donors were recruited across England, in 25 centers. Here you can see all the different regions. And actually, you can see the proportion of the donors in bold that for intervals, from the interval study that were recruited in each region. And in brackets, actually, the proportion of the blood donor population coming from that region. So as you can see, in terms of from geographical point of view, we have a broad representation of the whole country with some differences compared possibly to the whole general donors population. And indeed, the blood donors population slightly different compared to the interval. So there was similar in terms of potential, in terms of age, in terms of ethnic background, in terms of sex, even though that was by define was fixed in interval trial. But actually, there was some difference in terms of that the donors that were signed up for interval actually have a longer career of donation, and actually, they've been donating more compared to the other donors. Actually, when we compare the interval to the general population, we found as well that there was a lower proportion of new donors in the interval study compared to the general blood population, but at the same time there was a very similar hemoglobin deferral rate, and actually 2.1 versus 2.3 in terms of donors versus the general population versus the interval study. So at the end of the study, we were able to randomize 45,000 participants, saying half men, half women. And this is actually showing the flow diagram that how the different information that we collected. There are very few people actually withdraw from the study. We were able almost complete information about the unit of blood collected. That was the primary outcome. It's more than 99.5% across the board. And actually, the other outcome, for example, physical activity, was just collected in a subset, or still a large subset, about 65-70% of donors actually provide information about their physical activity. And what was astonishing as well, that how donors were really able and good in terms of providing their sticking to what they were being allocated in interval. So you can see here, this is the adherence of the proportion of adherence in the different groups. As you can see that many of the donors actually stick exactly to their interval. Really few actually have a longer time between donation. And this is really sort of showing first one the commitment of the donors to really participate in the trial, but as well the design of the trial was pragmatic in a sense that allow actually donors to engage and engage to the sign interval. So what was the primary outcome of the trial? So here you can see the main outcome of the study, both in men and women. As you can see from the red line, you can see that moving from individuals that have 12 weeks interval compared to 10, compared to 8, there's an increase or actually higher number of blood donation over 2 years of the main study. And the same for women, moving from 16 to 14 to 12, there was a higher number of blood donation, of whole blood donation during the 2 years of the study. So the steep of the curve, or the steep of the difference in some way between men and women was probably a bit steeper in men, but still there was both difference in both sexes. And as you can see, if you compare to the blue line, that was actually the information before the trial, all the participants actually sort of increased the number of donors when were compared to before the trial. And what's really as well interesting from this slide is actually you can see that even for donors have been located to the standard interval, so the interval that usually donors are allowed to donate before the trial or actually in normal time, you can see that there's a higher number of donation over 3 years, really suggesting that just being the trial was encouraging donors to come even at their regular interval. So not only the trial showed that actually a shorter interval, as obvious, will have increased number of donation, but as well that but even the same interval, just being on trial, actually been remanded to come back for donation, increase the number of pine collected over 2 years. There are a set of different secondary outcomes in relation to the safety of blood donation. Here, just highlighting some of them, for example, mental well-being, or the hemoglobin level, or the deferral rate, or actually the ferritin level. As you can see, there's no difference in terms of across the randomized group, in terms of donors' well-being and mental well-being, but there were some difference in terms of the hemoglobin level at 2 years, the deferral rate, and the ferritin level. And all of them suggesting that the more you donate, the more frequent you donate, the lower will be the hemoglobin level at 2 years, and actually the lower will be the higher, sorry, will be the deferral for low hemoglobin, and actually the lower as well will be the ferritin level measure at the 2 years after the end of the study. The other aspect that we're looking at as a secondary outcome was really about the potential for additional symptoms related to blood donation. And here's in this plot, I'm just showing what are the number of the different collection of symptoms that were collected from the donors using a self-report questionnaire. As you can see here, there's information about feeling faint, or fainting, dizziness, being more tired than usual, feeling breathless, or palpitation, or restless leg syndrome. And as you can see, this is both plot for men and women across the 3 different intervals in each group. As you can see, for many of these, there's actually an increase of reporting of these symptoms across the randomized group, suggesting that there are potential for increase of these symptoms, especially being more tired, or sort of feeling faint, or dizziness, or feeling breathless, compared to the donors that are donating with a longer time interval. Of course, this is only self-reported information, and on top of that, I think it's worth to notice that these are just assertions that haven't been observed when we correct or when we take into account both hemoglobin level or ferritin level. So there's no association between the hemoglobin and ferritin level with the higher incidence of the symptoms during the study. So the next question for us was, we assess interval over 2 years, so we can actually provide information about the safety and efficiency of collecting blood at a higher frequency in over a 2 years period. The next question was really, how can we be sure that this will be for a longer term? So what we did is actually we extend the interval trial for another 2 years after the initial 2 years, and that was done by inviting the original participants to take part in a follow-up. About half of the participants actually take up the invite and continue their donation, their random allocation to different donation interval for an extended 2 years. And on top of that, we actually randomize participants not only to continue to be on the randomized interval, but as well to different type of reminding. So we start reminding people in 2 different ways. One is a more intensive way, and one is what is more the traditional way, but usually the blood servicing usually does. And really the objective of this extension of interval was really about accessing, trying to evaluate how much acceptable is continuing on the trial, how much can be sustained the longer interval, and actually how will be the best way to remind people how to come back and donate. And as I say, the extension was up to 2 years. Some donors actually, given that we're at the end of the initial 2 years, actually will be in the extension for shorter. Of course, this is challenging because participants are not exactly representative of the main trial, given there's a selection of donors that were invited to participate, and this is sort of make people that actually were able to, in some way, to sustain the initial period of the 2 years for another 2 years. And so, if you want to be very critical, the allocated donation interval are not exactly randomized, but still we continue with the randomization that was done on 2 years before. However, the information about, for example, active versus routine reminder was actually strictly randomized in the second phase in the extension of the interval study. And here's some of the results that is what we show. So in this plot on the left, you can see the result from some of the main trial in terms of the participant, and then as well in the extension about what happened during after the 2 years. And you can see in blue, red, and green the different participants as defined in the extension study. So in blue you have people that, in blue and red, people that are actually part of the extension and allocated randomly to routine or active donation on active reminder. In green, people that were part of the main trial but were not part of the extension study. So you can already notice some difference, that the people that were not part of the extension study actually were donating less, but during the main trial, so they're less active during the main trial, and of course in the extension were not part of that, so they came back to the original donation frequency. That, as you can see, is about the 1.5 donation per year. And while people that were actually in the extension study were actually donating more both in the main trial, but then as well in the extension. And as you can see on the left hand side, you can see that the difference between the blue and the red, so the active and the routine reminder, as expected, there's no difference in the main trial, given that the system of reminding were exactly the same. But there is some difference in the extension study, in which actually people were reminded to donate either more actively in red, so higher number of donation, versus blue, the routine one. So a more active approach to remind donors about coming back to donate was actually resulting in a higher number of donation over a 2 year period. And so what are the results in terms of number of donation, and as well in terms of haemoglobin and ferritin? So the trial overall showed that actually you can collect more blood, and actually you can see from the left hand side, you can see that before the trial, then during the main study, and then in the extension study, you can see there's an increase in number of donation, possibly with an attenuation during the extension, potentially due to the bit of fatigue of donating at such a frequency over a 4 year time period. But on the other side, as you can see from the right hand side, both the hemoglobin level and the ferritin level, there was sharp decrease during the main and as well during the extension study, with some potential caveat, especially for ferritin at the end of the extension. Now, potentially due to the fact that donors were starting to take potentially iron supplementation that actually were not recommended during the trial, but there could be a potential effect of why there is a decrease in ferritin during the main trial, and then sort of stabilizing or higher level at the end of the extension study. So overall, I think the interval study, both in the main study but as well in the extension, show actually that it is possible to collect more blood by lowering donation frequency, and actually by increasing donation frequency, so by lowering the donation interval. And of course, this can be done for a period between 2 to 4 years at the expense of a lower hemoglobin concentration, actually, as well lowering iron store and especially ferritin level. So the next study that we've done is that I want to describe today is about the COMPARE study. So COMPARE study is a study that was done between 2016 and 2017, and actually was started as a result of some of the information we discovered during the interval study. So during the interval study, we actually measuring six-max blood count, full blood count at donation, at the first donation and the end of donation. We actually highlight how the potential lack of accuracy of the NHSBT current test for screening donors for the hemoglobin status. And actually, as you can see from the slide, there's an EU directive actually to make sure that donors, whole blood donors, should actually be checked for the hemoglobin level, and actually that the hemoglobin level should be greater than 125 gram per liter for women and greater than 135 gram per liter for men. And the rationale for this limit is really to try to two main things. One is to ensure that there's a donor protection, so make sure that the donors are they're able to donate, and as well that to prevent anemia in donors as a consequence of donation. And the second one is really sort of trying to be a recipient protection, really sort of ensure that there's enough hemoglobin level in the bag in some way, and as well that there could be detect any potential abnormality for the red cell or hemoglobin level. So one of the key aspects that we're keen to assess is how can we evaluate different methods to screen for hemoglobin level, and actually what is the optimum test to do that in the context of a large service like NHS blood and transplant. And so what we've done is really comparing 5 different methods, with one being the copper sulfate test, that is actually the one that is used that was used at that time in the blood donation service, and actually compare them to different methods. One being a gold standard, so the hematological analyzer, in this case using Syntex. The other were non-invasive device that actually could provide key advantage, especially in relation to the donors, and as well to the service in terms of the potential measurement. The standard one as well that is used in many other blood services, are capillary HemoQ, and then what we call a post-donation strategy. So how can we use actually the previous hemoglobin on the previous donation to infer what would be the level at the second or the subsequent donation. And the key aspect that we're keen to assess was really about the test accuracy, the feasibility and acceptability, and as well the cost effectiveness of doing different study. So again, this is an overview of the study design. So the study was actually divided into 2 stages. The first one in which we test the different methods, from the NHSBT one to the post-donation strategy to the HemoQ to oral sense and hemostat, so to non-invasive device, and then the second stage was really done to add information, actually add power to assess the non-invasive device, so especially the oral sense and the hemostat. So it's really focused on those 2. So overall, the combined sample between these 2 stages was about just over 21,000 individuals, and you can see here how the split of number of donors in each of them. So each of them will have a list, 2 measurements, so one new one and the gold standard. Many of them have more than 2 doing their assessment. And so what are the key results of the study? So here you can see the blood Alman plot by sex, by the different information. So we are comparing, here's compare against the gold standard, so the venous hemoglobin using a full blood count using Syntex. And as you can see already from this plot, the capillary HemoQ and the post-donation strategy actually perform pretty well, slightly different. So the post-donation strategy tend to overestimate the hemoglobin level. The capillary HemoQ tend to underestimate hemoglobin level, but both of them, behave in a pretty consistent way, with no huge difference, by level of hemoglobin level. I think what's really sort of surprising for us was the 2 non-invasive devices, so the oral sense and hemostat. As you can see from this plot, there's a huge variability in the differences between the different methods, and actually not only there's huge variability, that variability was changing according to the different level of hemoglobin at the baseline level of the donors. And if you translate that, when you compare in comparison with the standard venous blood sample, and actually you compare how you classify donors being, appropriately correctly bled, sort of this pale, in peach, versus correctly defer in gray, and then the 2-1, sort of the more important one, the inappropriate bled in dark red, and actually in incorrectly defer in dark blue. So as you can see, when you start to evaluate those proportions, you can see that capillary HemoQ is actually tend to, have a very small proportion of people that are inappropriately bled, but a larger proportion of people that incorrectly defer. And actually, this is almost opposite to what will be the post-donation strategy, in which there will be a slightly larger proportion of donors that will be inappropriately bled compared to donors that will be incorrectly deferred. And of course, this is defined by using the threshold that I use in NHSBT and as well in Europe, the 125 for women and 135 for men. As expected from the previous plan plot, you can see for all sense in spec, actually, the results were pretty scattered across. So there's large proportion both of donors that would be inappropriately bred and incorrectly deferred. So if we then look at the really sort of sensitivity and specificity and the ROC curve for the different strategy, and here actually compared to what would be the one for the current level for haemoglobin for NHS blood and transplant test, here in sort of this black circle, and you can see that actually both again the post-donation strategy and the capillary haemoglobin perform much better, and you can see how the sensitivity and specificity can change if we change the different level of the different threshold. But for the current threshold 125, 135, actually the capillary haemoglobin was superior to the other tests. Of course, with the post-donation strategy, you can actually change the threshold, and actually by changing the threshold, you can increase both sensitivity and specificity to match, or actually to be very similar to what will be by using, for example, a capillary haemoglobin. Again, the non-invasive device were pretty poor in terms of performance. So you can see, but the different thresholds were not performing well enough to be able to consider for a test to screen donors for before donation. And here, actually, you can see how this can translate into what will happen for 100 donors that will be deferred. Actually, you can see again the inappropriate blood, the incorrectly defer, and you can see how the large proportion correctly defer inappropriate blood for the two non-invasive device, while the other two are much more appropriate or much more ready to use for the blood donation service, both the post-donation strategy and then the capillary haemoglobin. Of course, the NHSBT method here, sort of as a benchmark, we know that it's inappropriately deferring, inappropriately bleeding, people that this is as expected, and this was not the rationale why OMPARE was set up. So this study, OMPARE was actually very helpful for the broad service that's now changed their approach to screening for hemoglobin level, and now planning as well to think about what would be the next step and how potentially a post-donation strategy could be implemented in the service in the future years. So the final study that I want to describe is the now ongoing study that is called STRIDE, and it is really sort of still ongoing. So I'm still presenting some of the initial information, but I will not be able to present results because the trial is still ongoing. And so here the rationale for set up the study was really to try to address how can we actually prevent a Vasavagal reaction. So as you all know, Vasavagal reaction are possibly the main complication, or the main complication, or the most frequent complication of blood donation. There's about 14 to 17 moderate WVRs per 1,000 donation worldwide. There's less severe reaction, but severe reaction actually can be very disrupting, both for the service and as well for the donors. In NHSBT, there's about every year is about 25,000 WVR, of which about 3,000 actually are really severe. And so again, this is quite disruptive, and this can create one of the greatest degree of donor injury that actually is caused by WVR. And on top of that, on top of being a threat for the donors, actually WVR, even if very moderate, and usually actually reduce the likelihood of donors to come back for donation. So not only an injury, donor injury, but actually demotivation for donors to come back, lack of motivation for donors to come back for donation. And so to try to address how best can we actually prevent those, and given that the relatively lack of randomized clinical trial, especially when we started STRIDE, there's now more and more studies are coming out about how can we actually best prevent Vasavagal reaction. But the idea for us was actually how can we test in a reliable way for different type of intervention. One being the hydration. So, for example, can we use isotonic water to help prevent not only in session but as well delay VVR. What about the exercise that actually happened during donation, what is called applied muscle tension? What happened if we change the time and position of the donor chair after donation? And as well, the fourth sort of intervention, how can we address the psychological mechanism underlying the visceral reaction in blood donors? And so the idea that we had was really to try to run a large study with VVR as a main outcome with the loss of consciousness, but as well including all VVR and LVR as secondary endpoint. And the idea was to do a large randomized, cluster-randomized trial that will involve the whole service with a sort of a slightly challenging design. So using two mixed design, one is a crossover design and one is a step wedge. The rationale for doing this complex design was because some of the interventions, especially the applied muscle tension and psychosocial intervention, need to be step wedge because there's a learning effect from donors that are coming back during the trial. And so they need to implement sequentially as in step wedge for those two interventions. The other two, the hydration and the chair, are actually crossover design. So there's a change intervention in the same donation center. And so as I mentioned, so we involve the whole service. So about 73 blood donation center mobile team, about 1.3 million donors for the duration of 36 months. So how we have been doing over this period. So on top of, first of all, on top of the trial that I just mentioned, the STRIDE actually has a bioresource that will actually enrich the trial and hopefully help us understanding some of the mechanisms behind visceral reaction in blood donors, but actually will serve as a general bioresource for many other questions that can be addressed using general population. And so how you've been doing. So this is just an update on that. So as I say, the trial is still running. We'll finish in November 2022. We started in November 2019. So far we are involved more than 1 million donors. We have implemented all the 4 interventions. We have a very, very low proportion of dropout rate for donors. And actually, we have recorded so far about more 32,000 visceral reaction during the study period. And you can see on the right, you can see the plot in which, of course, at the beginning, given that this is the count of unique donors, at the beginning, there's a large number of donors joining the trial. Then this is paying tail off, because there's just these new donors that were not already included in the trial. And what has been incredible as well for NHSBT, that we've been able to run the trial, not only sort of start the trial and run at the scale, but actually run at this scale during the pandemic. So we hope that the trial will finish in November 2022, and we hope to provide results that will inform not only NHSBT, but as well the worldwide policy about how can we prevent visceral reaction. So as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the key aspects of our research is that it's not only to run this large pragmatic trial in the blood service, but actually how can we use this information to address other questions, both relevant for the blood donation and the blood donation service, but as well to the wider population. And the way we have done that is really that donors that are coming through our study have been, providing consent, they have internet access, they have, we have been collecting some blood and store some blood, and actually we are allowed to record them for other study. And on top of that, we've been linking information that we have on these donors to hospital data, to hospital statistics. This is done in England through the NHS Digital. And on top of that, what we have done so far, we have used the sample that we use for collecting all this study to assess a series of molecular traits that will help us to understand a bit better some aspect related to the biology of some adverse event in blood donors. So we start with the DNA and link up, as I mentioned, to the disease, but actually in between, we're trying to measure a series of different information, going from the full blood count to different lipoprotein, to different protein, to different lipids, to different metabolites, really to try to have a whole spectrum of information that will link a molecule to disease strategy in blood donors. And so what are they? Just a snapshot of some key results. So what this is, the study was published a couple of years ago in Cell about blood cell trait. This is using large amount of information and actually combining the blood donor study with other study worldwide, and actually it's been the largest genome-wide study of blood cell trait today. More than 160,000 participants, many hundreds of independent loci that have been identified for many different blood cell types. And not only sort of identification of that, but as well identification of some of how those traits actually related to some chronic condition. Another example is how can we assess, how can we better understand the genetic determinants of iron homeostasis. It was published earlier this year, and it's really a combination again of some of the study, in this case INTERVAL study, plus other similar study in the Danish blood donors population and as well in Iceland. And by combining this information with rich information on ferritin and iron and other iron biomarker, we'll be able to better understand how the genetic and how some of the biology related to iron homeostasis. And of course, this is interesting from a biological point of view, but as well as interesting to try to understand how we can then identify donors that will be more or less susceptible for iron deficiency during blood donation. And just the last example that I want to provide, that by having such rich information on genotype, Willa Homoen and Nick Little and the block genotype consortium has been able to develop and validate a universal blood donor genotype platform that actually now is in a late stage of validation and development, and actually will allow, by using genetic information, to define different blood groups, and actually that can help the service really sort of to identify available unit, actually to identify rare blood groups that actually are actually in great need for many blood services. So just to summarize this really overview about these studies that we're running in England in blood donors. So I think both INTERVAL and OMPARE have provided evidence for blood service, especially for NHSBT in relation to blood donation, and actually inform policy and practice. Some of them are already being implemented in practice. We hope that OMPARE will do the same over the coming years. But at the same time, using of this large amount of information and actually of genetics, omics, and a biomarker actually will contribute to improve donor health. We hope that, for example, many information in relation to blood cell trait, to iron, to restless leg syndrome actually will help blood donation, blood transfusion, actually both in terms of products, but as well in practice. And actually the final point actually that this large-scale bioresource of blood donors actually can provide a resource for many other research. I think INTERVAL and OMPARE has been an example, but there are many other studies like the Danish blood donor studies actually showing how using this resource for many other purposes can be very helpful, not only to address questions in relation to blood donors, but to the general public anyway. And I'll stop here. I'll just acknowledge many partners, so I haven't listed all of them. This is some of the partners that we've been working together over the last few years. NIHR, Wellcome Trust and Institute, University of Oxford, and then all the study, and then all the donors have been actually involved in this research, and all the people that have this research to be developed. So thanks for your attention, and I'll stop here. Thanks a lot.